This morning I'm going to talk a little bit about stuff sort of around the topic of spirituality. You'll get a chance to. For the past few decades, there's been decrease in participation in churches and traditional religion in America. This is no secret. And the fastest growing group during this time have been the nones, N-O-N-E, those who hold no attachment to organized religion, people who don't have a church home. Both the number of people who stopped going to church and now the number of people who have never in their life attended church continue to grow. Many ideas are floated to explain this trend away from church, mostly involving people becoming disillusioned or disaffected from church teachings and the constraints of their church experience. One common statement that we hear about the decline in religious participation in America is the claim from many that they consider themselves to be spiritual but not religious in their orientation to faith. Now, this phrase captures many positions. We know there was a real trend away from membership, so we can see the not religious part, as most people associate religion with church going. And these are people moving away from a relationship where they were told what to believe and how to go about doing so. Now, as this started happening, I have to admit, starting about 20 years ago, we Unitarian Universalists started salivating at this trend, assuming that many of those who left traditional churches would find their true religious home here. And while this was sometimes the case, and some of us in this room proved that, we also learned that we were losing members at the same time. Not quite as fast, but we've been shrinking as well. Maybe it's because we don't make a clear case that we are available and different from mainstream churches, or maybe it's because we resemble them too much in many of the ways we operate. That's a topic for another day. An important question for me in understanding this large spiritual but not religious group, though, is what is embraced by them under the term spiritual. I imagine that most of us would have some difficulty explaining the difference between religiosity and spirituality. On the whole, we tend to associate religious with organized faith groups that operate churches and synagogues and mosques and temples, that have clergy trained to teach and lead religious practice, and where there's a specific creed or dogma to describe what is important in life. Churches do teach their adherents what to believe, how to go about devotional practice, and how to live a life consistent with their beliefs. Spirituality, by contrast, is something more inward, more individualized. It has to do with the alignment of the mind and the body and the spirit. Admittedly, there's a broad overlap between the two things, especially because one of the main goals of most religions is to guide and expand the spiritual growth among their membership. The problem with this is that the religions have a very restricted view of what is spiritual. And in the most common cases we're aware of, it's something that must ultimately point to finding a closeness to God. Many spiritual activities, like meditation, prayer, and asceticism, are commonly practiced by the most devout within religions. Think of the humble life of sacrifice in a monastery or convent, which is deeply spiritual. While religion may contain elements of spirituality, the practice of spirituality does not require a religious framework. That's what these people are telling us today. Spirituality looks to the incorporeal or immaterial aspects of nature, the principles of conscious life, and it sometimes might entertain the idea of a supernatural or incorporeal being animating the body. That's a lot of big words, but sometimes it doesn't either. We really don't know what most spiritual but not religious people are doing, and they gain this status solely by their claim of being so. My presumption is that at minimum, it implies they think they are good people, they try to be good, and they care about the life choices they make. It can also mean much more than that. In today's climate, those seeking spirituality outside of churches, the seekers, might engage in a whole mix of practices as they search for their own way of dealing with life, ranging from intellectual insight to mystical processes. The key element is that they are searching, sometimes alone, sometimes with others, to make sense of life. They are looking to answer the same questions that are addressed by religions, but without the bounds of church organization and history. The most fortunate among the spiritual but not religious might find a home here at Beverly Unitarian, where their pursuits are encouraged and supported by a congregation of other seekers, where they can share within an environment that we hope is one of safety and tolerance. I will take a moment to ask what we are here as Unitarian Universalists. Often we're accused of not really being a religion, and by the definitions of those critics, this is probably true. Clearly, we do not hold one set of beliefs, especially about God and the Spirit. However, we do practice together and pursue religious issues, and I would call this religious activity. And even among our own, there are some who would balk at the claim that we might be spiritual, thinking that this implies that entertaining a belief in something supernatural. I, for a long time, ran a humanist group at the First Unitarian Church when I was a lay member there. And it was always the biggest fight because all they wanted to talk about was religion. They wanted to bash religion. They wanted to explain why religion was a slippery slope to being a fanatical bomber, whatever else. And all of those things are possible. But the fact of the matter is, being a humanist is not just rejecting religion. There has to be something in this discussion about how one lives as a human. What motivates that? What brings it about? I could never turn the discussion in that direction. So I ended up leaving, and from what I can tell, they're still there doing the same thing. I believe that the majority of persons in our UU congregations are engaged in a search very parallel to that of the spiritual but not religious folks. We just pursue our search while held in the embrace of a shared community of fellow seekers. I, and this is just me, have a vague notion of a spiritual energy that emerges from community building and sharing actions between people, and that through sharing and association, we build a new level of connection that manifests its own energy and force that brings us towards unity. I have no idea whether this is metaphor or something real, but the idea is that we can create spiritual linkage, and it works for me. But that's me. Returning to the role of traditional religion and looking at what we are expecting our new forms of engagement to replace, it's important that we recall the human questions religions attempt to answer. And whether you are religious or not, life does present as a mystery, even after science has explained what it can. Questions of belief include things like the nature or existence of God, the nature of life and being, how we know things, how life in the cosmos and humanity got started. Is there an eternity? Is there an afterlife? And do we have a role in that? Is there a need for salvation? And so many more. What is goodness? What is evil? Why evil? These are all things people talk about in religious groups. One way to summarize this is the hymn we sang earlier. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? As an aside, these lyrics were taken from a painting by Paul Gauguin that hangs in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. The painting depicts three groups of women in a Polynesian setting. Reading from left to right, they represent the three questions posed in the title. A women with a child represent the beginning of life. Where do we come from? The middle group engage in the daily tasks of adulthood. What are we? And finally, an old woman facing death asks, where are we going? But today, our job is to interrogate our own sense of spirituality and our own ways of understanding some of these key religious questions. I could stand here and pontificate all morning, and you all know that I can do that. But I think it should now be your turn. I'm going to ask you all to engage in discussions, small group discussions with one another. And I'm assuming that these discussions are formative and that your statements reflecting thoughts will be in process. It is important that we work on such questions and probably that we learn to share our conclusions, whether they're truly conclusion or not. Just to show how mucky all this can be, I'll relate a story that some of you might have heard from my own youth. As I was thinking about how I held religious ideas, and particularly the question of ultimacy, and as I worked towards my early atheism, I sought information from my parents, both of whom had been raised as Unitarians during the 1930s and 40s. I asked each if they believed in God, and I got the same answer from both of them, which was, I don't think I do, but I think that your mother or father might. I was never sure what to make of that. It seemed sort of crazy to me, but then again, it seemed to work for them. Maybe I should have asked again 20 years later. I never got around to it. Well, I'll give you the chance today. I'm going to hand out some sheets. They're easy to recognize. They're bright orange. And if you can just sort of pass these around. There's not quite as many as there are people here, but we can share them. There's about 30 of them. Thank you. And I think I got to ask for one back. We're going to discuss, and let me check the clock. Oh, it's already 11. How did we get there? I didn't say much. What did you all do this morning? To do this out the way I was going to do it, it would take about 15 minutes, and already 11:35. Maybe we'll just do the first two. But we're going to discuss three questions, and I'm going to ask you to try to form. And I left extra row space between the rows so it'll be easier to move, to form into groups probably of 3, maybe 4. And the less you know the people in the group with you, the better. Although, given the example from my parents, maybe spouses should sit together. And I want you to form into these groups and to address questions 1 and 2, however it makes sense to you. Okay? Take about a minute max each to answer the first question. That's about 3 minutes. Take a minute or two to further discuss or debrief within your circle, and then repeat the process for question 2. Now, these are my rules here. There's no such thing as a right answer. There are only different ways of thinking. And I don't say it here, your thinking might be very different tomorrow than it is today. Don't worry about being right. Precision and perfection are beyond our reach this morning. Allow for sloppiness, but listen to one another with respect. Ask questions never to challenge what someone is saying, only maybe to clarify if you need to understand what they said. Passing is always okay. These are not necessarily comfortable topics, but these are questions that are addressed in religion and within any sense of spirituality. The first one is going to be your creation story, sort of. Where do we come from? Is there purpose, intention, or direction in the major flow of the cosmos, life, humanity, wherever you choose to go with that? And the second question is the God or spirit question. Do I perceive forces outside of myself? How do I feel these? How do I think they influence or maybe direct me? Those are 2 questions. There's more here and things that you can think about on your own or prompt questions, or might try to do it another time. But I'm going to ask you all to do this now, to rearrange yourselves. You can move chairs, you can move people, you can do whatever you want, and try to form into groups, probably triads. Is everybody who wants to finding somebody? Okay, go for it. Remember to pass the stick to other people in your group. At risk of being too controlling, I would suggest that we should probably be turning to the second question soon. And if you want to ignore me, feel free. Carol and Jeff, Latoya, and whoever else is on Zoom. Raymond, I'm sorry, I forgot to give you more specific instructions. And you're just sitting there watching people chatter. Please feel free to unmute and speak to one another. We're just discussing some basic religious questions, and we have a few minutes left. Or go off and eat breakfast and do whatever else you're doing. But I'm sorry I forgot to mention you guys up front. I didn't really prepare this for you, but I figured that you could carry on similar discussions on Zoom. If you speak, your words will not be broadcast to the congregation. Okay, groups, I'm going to give you a couple more minutes. Why don't you try to resolve the unresolvable as best you can, and then we'll come back together. Well, you can continue. Just, you got to break for a minute. What hast I wrought?
Hands up! Hands up! Smiles on faces. Nod and say thank you to your neighbors. Alan would like to wrap up and hear our thoughts. So we are going to give the mic back to our Reverend.
Darn, if you ever want to obtain control, get a nursery school teacher. I am thrilled by the energy that seemed apparent in this room. If you ever want to do something for fun, ask a bunch of people to answer questions like this and then just watch their hands. You guys do all kinds of things with your hands. This group was this way. Back there was somebody doing this. There was a lot of, anyhow. I'm not going to try to summarize where you just went. I would love to hear from people how the discussions felt. To me, this is the kind of thing we should be doing a lot in many settings, in small groups and in support situations and whatever else. And there's so many other questions that we want to ask, Why do we get involved in justice causes? What motivates us? There's the ones listed here that are traditionally religious. The whole important thing is your life should be examined and shared. And that's what I want to do here. Hopefully you found people that thought similarly and different from yourself in your group, and hopefully you each made a new friend. That's what we want to be about. And I'm going to leave this here for now. It's getting towards noon. Don't blame me. We will, I think there's a final hymn, isn't there? Yeah. Yeah. That really plays after this. It's Find a Stillness, number 352. What is it? 352. Hidden in all stories is the one story. The more we listen,